Hello in the future, because this is pre-recorded. Hello, my name's Jake Sussman. Welcome back, and I love to say good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're watching from anywhere in the world. Please do me a favor, just say hi, tell me where you're watching from, because there's something so cool about community. Now, my name is Jake Sussman, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a dyslexia and ADHD entrepreneur, an influencer, and the founder of Superpower Consulting. We're a mentorship firm for kids with dyslexia and ADHD to really have that role model, someone that's been there. Now, since quarantine started, I've been interviewing so many different types of people, from parents to young adults to professionals and to super moms that are just totally breaking the mold and doing amazing things, making such a difference. And all of us have at least one thing in common. It's that we are either in the space or all have some sort of learning and attention challenges. Now, I have two very special guests with me, Hillary and Michelle, representing Partners in Promise. Now, here's something cool. Partners in Promise isn't just your typical, advocacy organization. They specialize in military families. In fact, Michelle represented Partners in Promise testifying in front of Congress. What? Okay, we're going to dive into all of this for both of you, but please welcome Hillary. I'd love for you to just to start us off. If you could just share a little about yourself and how are you and Michelle working together on this thing?
Great. So thanks for having me. We really appreciate it. I actually met Michelle from being involved in special education. My ex-husband was on active duty until about a month ago for the last 20 years. So I spent a fair amount of my time in Coronado, San Diego, LA, and Hawaii, where there's a fair amount of Navy people. So most of my friends growing up that my daughter hung around with were Navy. So that is how I came to be introduced to Michelle.
Wow, cool. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And Michelle, tell me a little bit about your creation with Partners in Promise and how that really led you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jake, for having us today. It's such a pleasure and I'm a big fan. And Hillary, for instance, I met her through, Facebook world, and she's kind of my dyslexia go-to person, because we have a lot of folks on Partners in Promise, but we don't have that dyslexia expert. And so really when I needed that knowledge and expertise, it was Hillary who I was going to. But more about Partners in Promise. We are a grassroots advocacy organization that was established by 4 military moms. We all have kids with special needs. And I would say that my daughter was probably the inspiration behind the founding of Partners in Promise. Being a military family, to all the military families out there who might be listening today, we all know how difficult it is to move. We actually move every 2 to 3 years on average, which is very different than a civilian family who may have a child with special needs. And so you can imagine how that transition really affects our families as far as not only accessing medical care, but also ensuring that they receive access to an appropriate education as well. And there's a lot of fantastic school districts and administrators and folks out there who really try to do their best to accommodate our military families. But what we were noticing, and what was very evident when we moved to my last duty station here in Virginia, is that we were seeing like a trend of school districts kind of waiting us out and maybe not giving all the supports and services that we were coming in with an IEP, knowing that eventually you're going to move in 2 to 3 years. And so we had a really tough challenge in our last move, and it was pretty evident from the get-go that they were trying to minimize my daughter's disabilities, try to take away services and supports from that IEP. And we found ourselves having to fight, which is not something we're typically used to doing as a military family. There's always this belief that, folks in authority know what they're doing. They have the expertise. You don't really challenge it very much. And so it really put us in an awkward position when we saw what was happening before our eyes, and, seeing my daughter regress academically, emotionally, socially. And so when we were looking for help, what do you do when you see an IEP that's not being implemented? services and supports being taken away, we didn't have anywhere to go. And oh, by the way, my husband was gone during this time. He's, a lot of our families, are separated when they do trainings or they're deploying overseas. And so you feel really alone. And, unless you have resources to have an advocate to come with you, you really just end up kind of getting overwhelmed emotionally, get stressed out, and you kind of just give up. And I knew that's not what we wanted to do. And so we were fortunate to get an advocate, but it kind of brought up a lot of, ideas of like, why isn't there more support for our families? Why do we not have someone to go to? Where are our resources? I think there's just this whelming thought, from folks in leadership, like, well, it's federal law. They should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's federal law, but that really hasn't been the case. And so when word got out about our legal battles, we went to court twice. My daughter was sued. We've won every state complaint and due process, but it was really hard for us as a family, financially, emotionally. My husband was gone a majority of that time. And then when the word got out in social media and then also in regular news outlets, families started approaching us and saying, you're telling my story. That's exactly what's happened to me. Thank you for speaking up and doing this. But then how do we go from here? And how do we make reform? And so that's really where Partners in Promise came. It's like the four of us who've had these challenges with special education were asked to draft some legislation to how to address it, because we really did want to get involved with Congress and let them know, here's what's happening to military families in education. Everything's not working the way it's supposed to work, but we have some solutions. And so between what we've come up with, and we've had other families join us, we've been able to make a lot of progress. And so we're thrilled we're able to get some legislation into the 2021 NDAA, which is like the Defense Act for us. And we're slowly getting things like attorneys and advocates for our families. So it's been quite the road, but I'm excited about, the momentum that we're having. And, I always tell my families, if you see something wrong, speak up.
Yeah.
Because it's most likely you're not the only one that's having these issues. And military families, we're highly mobile. We move around a lot, and we just don't have that time. We just don't have the money to fight. We're getting up and moving. And of course you have deployments, which is also another stressor. So lots of things that are very unique to the military community.
Sure. I mean, it is so unique because, my grandparents were in the military, but I don't have any immediate parents that were deployed or any of that. So, I used to dread the weekends or in the summer holidays because that's when I was out of routine. But I can only imagine the unknown of where am I going to be in 3 years? I could be across the country, halfway around the world. And for kids who are going through or have any type of learning attention challenge or special needs, that kind of disruption it could be incredibly destructive. And our schools, if they're not accommodating, especially to those kids, that makes it very challenging. Now, I remember from a conversation way back when you were originally talking that you said that there were some stories of kids where like a family would move to a new district and the district would accept, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the district would accept only one child and not the other one in terms of accommodation. Is that not accommodations, but just in general? Is that something that you're seeing? Or if that was misspoken, just if you can just correct me on that. But I've never forgotten that.
Yes, we have seen that. It also, because the rules vary state to state, that's the other issue. Even from district to district, the way that each of them implement IDEA and how they accept those IEPs has been very discouraging for us, and how do you standardize, that? Because we are moving, even sometimes overseas, as Hillary, I know, has been working with a lot with our Dodea schools in Europe. One of our founders had a lot of problems with the move where they immediately rejected the IEP. Who rejects an IEP? And they actually sued them because they said, no, we don't think that he needs, X, Y, Z on this IEP. It just was frustrating for them. They don't have a choice. We don't have choices on where we live. So, if these bases are screened to be able to accept these families as far as medical care. They should be able to accept these families educationally as well. And it does put a lot of families in a bind. And what we find is, there are families that will just pull their students out and homeschool, because it's just easier. Your child, and it's just, perhaps not worth all the fuss to try to get someone to abide by the law.
Right.
Is that what you're saying, Hillary, too?
Yeah. And Hillary, I would love to hear your point of view and your perspective on this and experience, because you also have firsthand experience of this. So please, if you don't mind, that'd be so helpful.
Well, because my ex-husband was actually active duty Coast Guard, so we had to be by a body of water. So where we could go was not as broad as a lot of other people, but we spent most of our career in California and Hawaii. So we didn't have an IEP in Hawaii because we were too young. So my experience with an IEP only now became more apparent because we moved from California to Georgia at the end of 2019. Because my husband was moved to Georgia along with his new wife, and they're both active duty. And when I got to Georgia, same thing like she's saying, I didn't have a problem getting them to accept my IEP, but they basically accepted it and had no idea what to do with a dyslexic child. Because in Georgia, we didn't pass a dyslexia law till May of 2019. So while the federal law was there, I was also in a really rural place outside Robins Air Force Base, which is the largest industrial complex in Georgia.
Wow.
And they had no idea what to do. And it wasn't a small district. It was a district of 30,000 people or kids enrolled. And I think about 1,000 of them were active duty. So it wasn't like the active duty population was small.
Right.
So It was a fight when we got there. I like Michelle, I did not know about an advocate, which is quite comical because I'm actually a trained paralegal. I got a graduate level paralegal degree after college. And even as a paralegal, special ed law is not something that most attorneys or paralegals ever get any training on or know anything about. It's kind of like oil and gas or water law. And so I never knew I could hire an advocate until I got to Georgia, and I was blessed from another dyslexia support group to be introduced to somebody who happened to be a DOD attorney. And she told me, go hire an advocate, because I just did. And I thought to myself, if a DOD attorney is bringing an advocate to the table, what does that tell me? Right. That tells me I need an advocate. And so we hired an advocate, but we had maybe 8 IEP meetings in 2019 trying to get services and support.
We had 16 IEP meetings from fall 2014 to the end of spring 2016. I mean, it was crazy. My husband actually called in from an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf at 2 a.m. to attend one of the IEP meetings. Wow. So what does that tell you? You have a lot of younger families, that they are stressed when they're deployed about what's going on back home, because it is stressful when your child is failing and not doing well in school. So if you could imagine trying to work on these missions and these operations, and some of them you're landing at a boat at night, in the middle of nowhere with no, not even a moon that night. I mean, can you imagine how that stress might affect, our military? So I think there's just this direct impact, of not helping our families to operational military readiness and retention, so it just makes a point that we've got to take care of these families. Right. Because in turn, that's going to affect, how our military will serve and whether or not they want to continue serving. So it's just unfortunate that, out of all the families, that they're the ones that are giving the most, but this culture of, not helping them because, they're going to move again is frustrating for us. So we're hoping to solve some of that.
Right. It seems like that there needs to be some universal change, because not only are these are we talking about just families that are going through obstacles in school, but these are families that have committed their lives to protecting Americans, protecting our flag, our culture, who we are, and everything that we stand for in the world. They're out there fighting, and meanwhile, they have to worry about their kids getting the proper accommodations. Come on, that could put their life at risk.
Well, and a lot of them are in a lot of financial distress because if you talk about dyslexia specifically, you're kind of in a black hole between education and medical, and you don't get very good, training or
Right.
support at school, and so you have to go pay for it privately. Well, most of the people in the military who are enlisted,
Yeah.
they can't afford $500 or $800 a month in dyslexia tutoring. I mean, the Navy or the military does have tutor.com, which is a program for free for anyone on active duty, but it's not for people who have a learning disability. So there's not a lot of support or subsidy for people that are paying out of pocket, which creates a financial distress.
I'm getting like warm right now. This is just to hear this, and we've spoken before. I mean, we've been talking since June, but to hear this again, it makes my like hands sweaty because I'm just like, it's such a problem. It's such a problem, and how come it's not changed yet? Or we've been making strides, and we have some incredible organizations, including Partners in Promise, making these strides, but why can't we see, in my opinion, that this is a national security problem? We have a generation of Americans growing up to be functionally illiterate. Does that not make it a national security problem? We have to focus on this because this is the next generation, no matter whether we like it or not, and we have to do something about it. And I'm actually meeting with the state senator on Wednesday to talk about some of these concerns of what do we have to do. Like if we want to bring change, it has to happen by those who look at the world differently, not those who see the world the same. Right. And that's going to be those with special needs, those with dyslexia, those with ADHD, those who just think outside the box that don't fit in the mold. And that's just what we got to do.
You're absolutely right, Jake.
When you talk about,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say,
no, he's exactly right.
Hey, how are you? I'm good. Thanks.
Gotta love that. I will just say one thing. Let me say one thing. First of all, I think we're all in agreement that we need a fully fund IDEA. It has not been fully funded straight across the board. And I know that President-elect Biden, that is important to him. It's even on his website as far as fully funding. So I think that's definitely part of the pie, right? It's just money. Because, I think when these kids come into these different school districts, there's a competing agenda of like helping these children, but then what do we already have in our toolbox? And is this going to be something more than that's not already in our toolbox? I just think that there's always going to be those decisions that are made at an administrative level. And it's not the teachers per se. I think it's just driven from above. Like, this is what we've got to work with, and this is what it's going to be. And there's money attached to our children as well, but and that's a whole different story. But it's not enough. So we need a fully fund IDEA because that's important. And how do we recognize that the military is different than the civilian community? How do we ensure that they know that we are a highly mobile population? We're unique. How do we set that apart in any type of future legislation? I think those are going to be important pieces to it. And then continuing to bring this awareness to the civilian community, because together, if we can at least solve this problem, a lot of times, the military is the guinea pig for a lot of things. I've had discussions with our COO, Jennifer, about, don't ask, don't tell. Certain things happen in the military first, as the breeding ground, and then if it works, and then we can put it in for the whole civilian community. So if we can get some reform within our community, and if it works, then this would work for everybody. So just trying to get the civilian community aware and to want to help us make these changes is important.
If you think about it, though, I mean, I think that you have a good point, because if going with this conversation of, let's say, the military is, in a way, I mean, with the most due respect, the guinea pig, right? But let's go back another bit, right? We talk about decision makers, okay? the decision makers in Congress, right? Those who are going to be signing away these bills, right? In order for them to understand and get behind something, they have to relate to it in some way. They either have to be sold to it. And how does someone get sold on something? Well, they have to see how it makes sense to them. Mm-hmm. So here we have two things. We have multiple things going on. We have our military, which is a top priority, obviously. Then we have education, which a lot of people tend to forget. It's like you look at our public schools, how come most of our public school buses don't even have air conditioning? So like we have the public, our school system, which we don't really think about because, well, a lot of these decision makers haven't been in school for a long time. So we have that. But then if we combine it, plus with our disability funding for our families, now we have multiple angles to go at with pushing our policymakers, the big decision makers, to make a dramatic move. And in return, if they see the impact and if they see the impact of all of this moving around, plus these kids and these families being in distress, either financially or emotionally, especially our soldiers out overseas that need to be focused but are having a hard time focusing because they're thinking about their kids, it becomes an issue. So if we can combine all that together, then when it works in the military families, then the repercussion of that is going to be everyone else.
Absolutely.
And it almost seems like what Partners in Promise is doing is our foot in the door, because honestly, as you know, pushing policy is a journey in and of itself. Okay, so you have your foot in the door. You've spoken in front of Congress already. You've gotten to that point, and a lot of our advocates out there that are civilian advocates have maybe gone there yet, or on the state level, but we need something much bigger than that. So if we get our foot in the door, everything else comes into play. That's how that's.
You're absolutely
well,
right.
She kind of did that. Michelle did that because what she did that not a lot of people know about is Virginia recently changed their law and added 2 parents to their military interstate compact. Yep. Which has a really long, fancy name that no one can ever say right. But basically,
it's a really cool acronym, right?
Yeah. So she changed the state law in Virginia and added 2 parents to the Virginia Military Education Council, which meant that a parent now had a voice at the table. And you're talking about, well, why don't these senators not know? Well, like I live in Georgia, which currently has 65,000 people on active duty. We have the same kind of council that Virginia has, but yet there must be 50 people on that council. It's full of superintendents, people from the Georgia DOE, school liaison officers who are DOD employees who work at every base in Georgia. And there's, again, not a single parent on the committee. There's not a single person who has any personal knowledge of an IEP on this committee, but yet they're the ones making the decision, the benefit of these 65,000 families.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Doesn't make sense, but congratulations on it. That's massive. And that should be a model for other states to follow.
That's what we're hoping. We're hoping to get military spouses from each state to kind of take the torch and not reinvent the wheel, but just use what worked for us and be able to apply it to all the states. But one thing I want to talk about that you mentioned as far as legislation goes, what really makes congressmen and women happy is data. Data informs change. And our community has been under-surveyed for over a decade. And when they do survey, children with disabilities in the military family, they really only looked at the medical piece. What kind of medical care do they need? How can we help them access those providers? No one was really looking at the education piece. And so if you go back through all of the studies, there's only like one that kind of sort of said, there might be some problems here. There's just always, again, that assumption that federal law was taking care of everybody. And so I think that's what we started to do. Is last year we had a survey that we started. It was the first one ever. It was really more of a qualitative, hey, are we wrong? Is there a problem here? And 97% of the families reported back like, yeah, there's a problem. It's very negative. Here are my stories. And so we followed up with another survey just recently this past fall, and we kind of started to dig a little deeper. Why are people not enrolling in this military program called EFMP? Is it because there's a stigma of, it might hurt the active duty service member's career, or there are other reasons why they're not? One of the things we also looked at was, well, if there are problems in a school, why are you not filing a complaint? And that one we're going to have to dig a little deeper, because we couldn't quite get there, but I think there are multiple reasons why they don't stick around. First of all, you're leaving again. It's that stress and the lack of resources to help them to file a complaint. So again, these, families are moving all over the place. And I think it's just hard to see that pattern because we're moving again. So once we start getting more data, I think it's going to also show that this is systemic, just like we thought it was. But we have solutions to hopefully, change that and to help these families. So data does everything.
Yeah, data is everything. I mean, it is really important. The thing is that I have a personal interest in is in social emotional development and growth, because we can give as many resources as we want to these kids, but if they're not open to learning it, it's not going to work. And I was one of those kids that was being received all these resources and all this stuff, but like I just wasn't open. I wasn't inspired, or my spark wasn't there. And to create that spark, which is the social emotional component, that's harder to get data from because it's more emotional, but it also impacts the data as well. Like, let's say a child's academic performance for the first month of a parent being deployed again is significantly lower than when 3 months in and they've gotten used to again the single parent lifestyle when mom or dad's away. So the performance in school during that month is like, let's say a full letter grade lower than if they were 3 months from now. So that's a component that's hard to measure on a test, which is why exams and the SATs I don't support at all anyway, because there's so much that goes into that we don't know about,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but no, it is important, the data and collecting and showing with the congressman. It's very important.
Well, and I love that you're talking about the social emotional piece, because a lot of these schools that do have a lot of military families get extra funding to have programs in place to help educate the educators to know what these military families might be going through. And they'll hold events and maybe even have, particular type of programs in place just for these military kids.
Right.
But I think that the mentorship, what you have mentioned before in the past, that would be key. It really would, to help these families, especially if they come through from a military family. Hey, I've lived through this, through junior high or middle school and upper school, and this is how I dealt with it. And just, I don't know, knowing that, you're going to get through this no matter what. Just having that support system in place is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And absolutely. I mean, Hillary, what do you think about it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, like I said, we spent a lot of our career in Coronado, California, which is outside San Diego, and there's a huge military population. And so my child did benefit from what she's talking about, the military counselors and stuff that were paid for either from DoD grants or from, impact aid or whatever. And it does make a difference, but sitting at a lunch table with your military friends once a week doesn't always necessarily get it done. They do a lot of fabulous stuff, but it's not enough one-on-one. And when you tie the social emotional, I don't know if Michelle knows this part, but kids that are dyslexic have like a 50 or 60% suicide success rate. And that's because their failure to learn to read and be able to be in the classroom causes them to have high anxiety and depression and all this other stuff. And so if we can fix the problem before it becomes a social emotional issue, we can change the story of what's happening.
Right.
That's a good point, though. You're right, because our children with disabilities don't always do well in those settings of once a week, let's meet together. And no, a lot of times it is needing that one-on-one. And like you said, solving the problem from the get-go, making sure that they're the correct supports in place, to help them read, to even get to that point of anxiety and depression. So
Right.
yeah, it's like a domino effect, really.
It really is. And I think what you were talking about with the mentorship is a key component, because you're talking about building a relationship with someone that has already been there, so
Mhm.
that they don't feel like they're alone. Like, I can only imagine what it must be like to move 10, 15 times throughout my school experience.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine it. Honestly, I have no idea. And I moved once, and that was enough, right? So, in the same town, let alone. So I think
Yeah.
that it should be such a priority. And it's so important to talk about, just like our veterans. Talk about our veterans. It's like a lot of our veterans, there's a lot of programs, but they don't get the type of attention that they deserve, because they gave their life for our country, and now they're back, and a lot of them are homeless on the streets. So we want to we want to give back to not only our military families, and not just give back and support them, but to give an opportunity to have a voice. And you're creating that. You're really creating that. It's so inspiring. And when I heard about you and what both of you are doing, I was just like, oh my gosh, there's someone doing that. That's so cool. And not just cool, but important and needed. And families need to have a voice, and to have an organization that represents these families that may not have their voice yet, or maybe trying to find theirs, is in doing that, and paving the way, is exactly what we need, really.
Thank you. Go ahead, Hillary.
That's always funny. I was just going to say that when you talk about dyslexia specifically, one of the big obstacles that anybody who's active duty has is that every time you have to move and somebody writes you a new IEP, you don't necessarily get the same program you were using at your last school. So they're constantly switching your program.
Oh
There's
yeah.
a lack of consistency. And when you also talk about how is dyslexia specifically a huge problem for someone on active duty, or the child, the problem, one of the two biggest problems that if we could nail this part down, it would start to change the story for everybody, is one, the confusion about how you get tested for dyslexia and who can do the test and what kind of test you need. When you're an active duty family, you can manipulate, and take stuff from school and stuff from TRICARE. And a lot of people don't know how to use the resources. So a lot of people can't figure out how to get tested to even see if they have dyslexia. And then the second problem is just getting them some remediation. And the thing about dyslexia is most of these programs can be done online, assuming you're 7 or older, right? So there's no reason that your continuation of tutoring should be breaking every time you move. And if we could fix that, I think that it would start to help all the other eligibilities under IDEA, because it would pave the way. And it would be an interesting one, because dyslexia is one of the only ones that's jumping back and forth between education and medical, and like, whose problem is
Sure.
it? Most of the other people that Partners in Promise help with, a lot of the medical people, they just have medical issues, and they have to go to school, yes, but they're not fighting them for programs and stuff. They're fighting for aids, they're fighting for services. And so it's a little tricky.
Definitely, dyslexia is in its own category. From our recent survey, they're the majority of the folks who are paying out of pocket. And like you said, if it's an enlisted family, the numbers are high every month, up to 10,000, even higher, for particular programming. And so you should do that, Hillary. You should put together a nice slide, just one slide that says, did you know you can do A, B, C, D, and did you know TRICARE pays for da, 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 da. That way you can have that, just easily available to folks who have questions and, the system. But it's dyslexia is a difficult one for sure. Because the other ones, and I would say also those folks who are under the autism spectrum, because there's so much comorbidity of all the different diagnoses on that one. It's hard to tease out where all the issues are and how to come up with a good plan. And again, the whole point of an IEP is it's individualized, and it's to that student's unique needs. And that's another problem, is just everybody is different. So you can't put something in place all the time because it's so unique to that person. You can't say, well, all dyslexia kids need to be in a specialized schooling. That's not necessarily the case because each of them is different. So and maybe one does really well with OG and another one with Wilson. I mean, who knows, right? So it's frustrating. It's really frustrating, but I think we are making some ground here, slowly but surely.
It's frustrating, but it's the fire you need.
Yeah.
This is what I tell a lot of parents, and something that I really stand by is that the work that's done now, even though that it's frustrating, and even though that it doesn't seem like a lot of change is happening every day when you're in it without the music playing, right? So there's a good friend of mine, his name's Tomer. He actually was in the IDF, and he taught me this saying that when we always hear these big stories about these success stories, right? Or even hearing your story speaking in front of Congress. What? Like, that's so cool. But what we don't know is what happened before that.
Right. How'd you get there?
When the music isn't playing, that's when that's when it really happens. That's when the work really begins. That's when the hard stuff happens. And when the music's playing, it's great. It's like you could watch Rocky. I did this last week. I showed on a live one of Rocky's motivational scenes when he's like working out again. He's like, yeah, with like getting strong now, right? So imagine watching that scene. I encourage you to do it. Watch that scene and watch it with the music, just 1 minute of it, and then watch it again without the music. And what you see is just the pain and the struggle and like getting punched and bleeding and like the whole thing. And then when you turn the music on, you're like, yeah, this is awesome. So it just is a great contrast because right now we're in the moment of when the music's not playing. We're just in it. But then one day that people are going to be talking about our work now because our kids and our kids' kids are going to have the school in the America that they deserve to be living in, which is a place where education is at a priority and our kids with special needs are at a priority because our world needs change. And that happens by those who look at the world differently.
Absolutely. And like you said, you don't see all the blood, sweat, and tears that go up to that point. And it was just, I always say this all the time. It's just humbling and honored to be those voices, to be that voice that day in front of Congress. But it's a lot of weight on your shoulders to try to get the story right. And you can't make everybody happy. But I will tell you, the situation with my daughter it's going to take years of therapy for her to really get through everything that's happened in these last 6 years. And so those are the battle scars that I don't talk about as often, but they're there. Yeah. And she knows that speaking up on her behalf is going to change the lives of others, but it's like reliving it sometimes. When she was listening to me in Congress, she was, I found out later she was crying, for the majority of the time I was speaking. So, and then she listened to the other military spouse who was speaking. She was crying for her too. So these kids, they know what's going on. They may not have the voice for it, but they know that we're speaking on their behalf. And to me, I'm just so grateful and blessed that she's letting me speak for her. But I hope at one point I can, we can move past this and that things will be in a good place for those that are coming after us. So hopefully.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to just leave you with any other last pieces of advice that we can leave for our parents that are out there watching you. And again, I didn't really talk about this during our session because it is pre-recorded, which I will be actively on the feed talking to you right now. So hello, everyone in the future. But if you do have questions, just let them out and I'll be happy to relay any questions that you have to Michelle and Hillary. And especially if you're from military families, seriously check out Partners in Promise. They're changing the game literally as we speak, literally in Congress. It's awesome. So yeah, if you do have anything that you would like to share. And then lastly, the last question that I'd like you to end with is, what is your superpower?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
No pressure.
No pressure. I always tell people, if something's not right in your gut, trust your gut. And if it's not right, it's not right. And so that's when you need to speak up. And when we were going through a lot of these things, we had lots of friends that said, just give up, go pay for her private school. Don't worry about it. This is too much stress for your family. And we had to do some soul searching. And my husband and I were like, you know what, we're in the position to do something. And that's do the right thing at all times, even though it's hard. And guess what? It tends to be the hardest thing is the right thing. So do it and speak up, because it's not, something needs to change. And collectively, that's how parents, moms, we know what to do. We need to band together and do what's right, do the right thing. And please join us, partner with us. Go to www.thepromiseact.org, which is our website, and sign up for our newsletters. We're an all volunteer organization right now, and we're making a lot of progress, but the more, the better. So just please come and share your stories. If you also have a military family and have had, challenges, with special education, we'd love to hear about it. So come meet with us. Mm-hmm. And of course, Hillary is great. Hopefully we can work more with her in the future.
I think my superpower is probably, if you get anything about my personality, I'm not the person that takes no for an answer. So if you tell me no, I'm going to come back 100 times until I figure out why I can't do it, how I can get it done, or how I'm going to change it. That is my superpower. Probably why I was a good paralegal, because I just kept digging till I found the evidence or whatever.
No is the start of every negotiation. Yeah. Got it.
Right, it is. And, the reason that I'm doing this is because while I was blessed with a loud mouth and I'm not afraid of people not liking what I have to say, my opinion is that, like Michelle, if I don't say it, who's going to say it? Because my ex-husband is now retired. Nobody can do anything to us. I personally want to see the Coast Guard do similar things like the DoD has done for the other force services. Because for most of the 20 years that I spent affiliated with the Coast Guard, we've always been the ugly stepchild. And so this is another situation where we're not, we're sort of included, but not really. And that's not a fault of Michelle. That just has to do with the way policy and law and sources of funding for the Coast Guard come from a different source than the DoD. And the last thing I'm going to say to anybody, because this is specifically for dyslexia and we're talking about military kids, don't take no for an answer. Stop playing nice. I personally have helped a lot of people on active duty get services for dyslexia on an IEP, but you're going to have to fight, and you're going to have to not take no for an answer, and you may have to come back several times. And unfortunately, the way that it is now, you can do it the easy way or you can do it the hard way. And the hard way is without an advocate or an attorney, unfortunately. The easier way is with an advocate. Because I'm speaking from personal experience, the county I just left, most of the people that show up with an advocate that are dyslexic are getting services now because the law changed in Georgia, and the ones who don't necessarily always get services because they're not asking the right question.
Right. I will also say, thank you both for sharing that. I want to also add that 2 is better than 1. Mm-hmm. And that if you have a partner, a friend, a spouse, a husband, a wife, and go into that meeting together as a unit, and if you are divorced or if you're separate or whatever that is, if you have a way to go in that meeting together, you will show up more powerfully together than just by yourself. And I think that is super important for all of our families out there. A lot of moms are out here doing this just by themselves. Yeah. And I want to know, where are the dads? Where are the dads? So I encourage the dads watching this, get involved. Get involved, because your kids need you and they need a unit going and representing them. So that is, in all, I think this has been great. I have the chills, just so you know, by hearing both of you in your stories, and it's just so awesome. But really, thank you so much for joining all of us today, or tonight, or this afternoon, wherever you're watching this from. And I really hope that we can have you back and to hear some progress, and maybe I'll see you on the floor of Congress. Who knows?
Never know. Thank you, Jake, for all that you're doing for our families as well, and reminding people that they do have those superpowers, and anyone can make change. It's just, setting your mind to do it, and also having that tribe. We're lucky to have some amazing military spouses that work with Partners in Promise, and without them, we wouldn't be where we are today. So, again, like you said, bring someone with you. I've been in a lot of meetings where there's 16 people around a table and then me. And, I have some kind of tips and tricks I've always shared with people on what to do when you're in that situation. But, I've brought my godmother, I brought other folks with me just to have someone there. And that's what you need, support. Support is everything,
That's it.
So
That's really
exactly.
it. Really good. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. Have a happy holidays, happy new year. And let's bring some change in 2021. It's the year of the comeback. I'm telling
Yes,
you.
a year of hope.
The big year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jake.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.